Hi there. Welcome to Chapter 8. So far we have talked about the general structure and functions of bones and major bones that make up the skeleton, as well as zooming into some important different parts of the bones. So we are going to continue on this theme, but this week we are taking a bit different angle to the skeleton. In particular, we will be looking at the joints, and these are sometimes also called articulations. So these are sites where two or more bones meet, allowing us to alter the angle of the body part that they form. So in this chapter, it is going to be useful for you if you remember some of the terminology that we talked about movements at the beginning of the course. And I will include a link to that video at the end of this one, just in case you wish to review them. Next, I think that we should discuss about the function of these articulating sites, or joints if you wish. So at large, these functions can be classified in two groups. These would be allowing the movement of different parts of the skeleton, as well as keeping the skeleton together. Think about it. They allow us to alter the position of the parts of the site in question, either freely or in a controlled manner. In addition, without joints, our skeleton would not be much more than a pile of bones on the floor. And as you well know by this stage of your career as anatomists and physiologists, in addition to the functions, we do also need to talk about different ways of classifying joints. And the two approaches that we will be using are looking at the structure of the joint, which we will do in this video largely. And we can also look at the function of the joint. And this we will cover in a later video. So I think that we are going to start with the structural classification method. Here we go. Structural classification methods are based on the material that binds the bones together. We can also be considering whether there will be a joint cavity present or not, and this applies only to the last of these. Only synovial joints have a joint cavity. So let's start by looking at these fibrous joints. And there are another three subcategories there to look at in regards to the fibrous joints. And let's go through them by looking at examples of each. Sutures are something that you were introduced already earlier when we were reviewing different bones that make up the skeleton. The literal translation of sutures is seams. And I think that this describes them pretty well. In these wavy bone edges of the articulating bones join together, interlocking tightly. And in a fully developed and mature suture, the junction is fully filled with very short connective tissue fibers. And yes, you remember from when we discussed these for the first time, these are only found in the skull. Here we have a nice illustration of a small part of a skull. See how throughout the junction where these two cranial bones join, we have these little teeth-like projections that go back and forth in and out of the opposing bones. This forms a very strong junction in an adult skull. Next, let's look at syndesmosis. I know that's a peculiar word, right? Well, the way to understand this is again break the word into its basic pieces, and we will find out that the term syndesmosis means a ligament. So syndesmosis are joints where the bones are connected fully by a ligament, or another cord or band of fibrous tissue. As a result, of course, the range of movement depends on how much movement is allowed by these bands. And here is a good example. We see that the inferior fibular joint here is connected by a ligament band. And on this one, the fibers would be very short, so not a lot of movement is allowed between those two bones. While on intermembranous ligament, which connects the ulna and radius, we have long fibers that allow a large amount of movement. Okay, now let's look at the last example of fibrous joints. The word root for this one comes from Greek, where gompho means nail. This is a very good description of this kind of joint, so the only place where I can think of us seeing these in the human is the teeth articulating with the alveolar area of the jawbone, for example. So these are a little like nails hammered into their sockets. We end up finding short periodontal ligament connecting these. So those were examples of our 3 fibrous joints. Now let's move our attention to the cartilaginous joints. There are 2 types to look at in this group. The first one that I want us to have a look is the synchronosis. This means the junction of bones that are united into one as cartilage. And what is noteworthy is that pretty much all of these are immovable, so we have very strong joints. And this time I have 2 examples to give. The epiphyseal plate in children's long bones is a good one, and then we have also the immovable joint that connects our first rib to the manubrium of the sternum, so our chest bone. This as well does not move. As for the second type of cartilaginous joints, let's have a look of the symphysis. Here we have fibrocartilage that unites the bones. And remember from our discussion of different cartilage types, I will add a link to this video too at the end of this one. Fibrocartilage is very resilient and can act as a shock absorber while allowing a limited amount of movement. It is also possible that we have some hyaline cartilage present, for example, at the articulating cartilage of the bony surface, but it really is mainly fibrocartilage. And examples that I could think of are the intervertebral discs between the vertebrae and the pubic symphysis of the pelvis. So now we have covered the 2 first ones of our structural classification of joints, the fibrous and cartilaginous joints. Next, I want us to talk a little about the synovial joints. For that, I have a little different activity available in the next section. We will finish off synovial joints in the next lecture video once we have looked at a time lapse of the major parts of it. I will see you then.